All right, everybody. If I can have everybody's attention, my name is Bill Callanan. I'm the facilitator for the next part of the conference, and I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be asked. I have always been a big advocate of the ASA in terms of the opportunity that it brings to create dialogue here around future and innovation and science and how it, I suppose, impacts and how we should shape it to impact our sector, which we all love and, I suppose, work in and are fully committed to in the longer term. I suppose when I reflect on some of the presentations today, there's been a couple of really key, really big issues that have been put on the table. You know, that need for transformation in our food systems and a food systems approach that we heard from Jack earlier on. The whole area that we're in a massive transition period. And I suppose when we look to that massive transition, we have to recognise that the farmer is at the centre of that. And for many, there's almost a feeling of being overwhelmed or always being the butt of a lot of criticism in terms of this. So this session, which I'm delighted to introduce, will look at the connection between the processor and the consumer and the learnings that we're hearing from, I suppose, that interaction, and I suppose what we can, I suppose, take as messages from that. I'm delighted to introduce, we have two speakers in this section. We have Margaret Berry, who is joining from Kepak Group, Head of Sustainability in 2022, since 2022, and who is responsible for the development and implementation of Kepak Group sustainability strategy. She has over 20 years' experience working in the Irish food and agribusiness industry, is a graduate of the Borbia Talent Academy Fellowship Programme, and her background is in strategic business development roles with Kerry Group, Borbia and UCD. And she will share many of those messages around the shopper conundrum, the sustainability demands, and I suppose what the consumer is expecting. Our second speaker who's going to join us online and is logged in is Dr. Jeroen DIjkman. He is the founding head of the Nestle Institute of Agricultural Science and Nestle Research, headquartered in Lausanne in Switzerland, and it incorporates Nestle's existing plant science research facilities in France, as well as numerous research and research farms around the world, looking at plant science, dairy livestock science and agriculture science systems. Prior to taking up his current position, Jeroen combined the roles of Director of International of the New Zealand Agriculture Greenhouse Gas Research Centre and Senior Technical Advisor at the UN Environment, Climate and Clean Air Coalition Agricultural Initiative. So I suppose we have two speakers who are eminently suited to tease out that issue of connecting the consumer and producer. So in terms of structure, we have two 15-minute presentations. We'll run from one straight into the other and then do a question time of about a half an hour. So I would like people to reflect on what type of questions they'd like to ask our two speakers. My apologies, I do have a bit of a sore throat. It's not COVID, I can assure you, but I hope everybody can hear me clearly at least. Thank you.
Yeah, all good. Good afternoon, everybody, and Bill, thank you very much for that nice introduction, and thanks to the ASA for having me here today. So, just to start, I'd like to take you back to about 5 years ago. And this photo was taken in March 2018 on our farm. My daughter Julia is just a toddler in this photo. She's barely 3 years of age, and at the time she hadn't even started play school. Together with my husband Hugh, they had just named the calf in the photo the Gruffalo, after the children's character of the author Julia Donaldson. But in a blink of an eye, Julia is now almost 9 years of age, and she's just started second class. I can tell you the Gruffalo lived a very happy life on our farm, and while I can't tell you where he is now, I can tell you Kepak found the right customer for him. But interestingly, this photo took me back when I was preparing for today's conference, because I was thinking about sustainability and the thought around the days are long and the years are short. And I've no doubt this phrase resonates with many of you here in this room, because like so many people have mentioned this morning, there's so much overwhelm about sustainability. Everywhere we look, we see statements about new targets. We see net zero, carbon neutral, nature, all by 2030, 2040, and so on. So today, I'd like to take a step back from those big, ambitious targets, and I'd like us to consider about what's happening on the ground, and to consider it from the lens of a processor, as we, the industry, embark on this journey to become the world leader in sustainable food systems. So a little bit of context. I'm aware many of you aren't in the meat sector, although you are in the agri-food industry. So it is one of the most important Indigenous sectors in the country. It supports over 120,000 farmers. In 2022, the exports were valued at €4 billion. It employs 16,000 people, and the average meat processing plant contributes 100 million to the local economy and over 300 direct jobs. So there's no question that it is a critical and valuable contributor to the national economy in terms of economic and social activity. The sector has certainly come a long way from being a frozen commodity business into one of the top 10 largest net beef exporters globally. And thanks to our industry stakeholders and to Origin Green, many of whom are here today, we've been able to build a strong reputation around high-quality, safe, nutritious and sustainable food on an enviable grass-based system. So you could say the potential truly exists. But sustainability requires a full supply chain effort. And as processors, we're able to see a little bit more about what's happening up and down the value chain. So I want to just take a moment to look at the green consumer, or what we've called the elusive green consumer. So on the surface, there has apparently never been a better time to launch a sustainable offering. Consumers increasingly say they want sustainable products, but the consumer is presenting us with a conundrum, because there's a gap between the consumer sentiment about sustainability and the consumer action for sustainability. They say they want progress, but most aren't changing their shopping behaviour, nor are they willing to spend more money on sustainable products, especially amid today's cost of living squeeze. So this recent survey that I'm sharing echoes the comments that have been made already this morning, and there won't be any surprise to hear that 80% of consumers say they are concerned about sustainability, but only 20% of them are in fact acting and paying for sustainable products. But interestingly, less than 7% of them are paying a premium, and grocery retail of that is at 2%. So taking a closer look at the red meat category, and at Kepak we recently carried out some proprietary research, and some of the key learnings that came out of that was that of the 60% of consumers that we spoke to in the UK and Ireland in the red meat category, they expect positive health, welfare and environmental credentials to be inherent in the product. They do not want to pay for these. And like many categories, there's still confusion around the environmental impact of red meat production, because consumers are split 50-50 about what's positive and negative. So it would be easy to blame consumers' reluctance to buy sustainable products around price, and particularly in the current environment. And price certainly is a factor, but there are other barriers, because consumers are confused and disillusioned. They're confused about the impact they can make as individuals, with only 20% of them believing that they can make an impact. But more significantly, and this is important for us to note, 70% are disillusioned with corporate claims. They believe they mask the true intent, and that they're really there to polish reputations and attract customers. So the consumer certainly cares about sustainability, and I think we've touched on that already today, but there's gaps still there for them. And we collectively need to surface the right facts and communicate them in a simple and consistent way, so the consumer can feel good about their choices and trust the food that they buy. Because on the one side, you've got B2B customer who's got enormous stakeholder pressure to deliver on ESG credentials. But on the other side, you have a consumer who wants those ESG credentials into the product, but they don't want to pay for them. But moving to sustainability commitments and action is hard. and I think we will all believe that. But what we're seeing at Kepak is that our customers are heavily focused on trying to find the roadmap of how they're going to get to the more sustainable journey. And that sustainability conversation is widening. It's going beyond emissions, and it's calling on companies to report and disclose across their entire business, as was mentioned in the previous session with regards to the arrival of CSRD. And at the end of a long and complex supply chain creates a huge challenge for B2B customers, and they can't act on sustainability in a meaningful way without their suppliers and their manufacturers like us acting with them. So without the help of us and their downstream partners in the supply chain, critically, their reputation, or should I say trustworthiness, is on the line with consumers, with investors and other key stakeholders. And frankly, I have to say, so is ours, Kepak's, our peers, the sector and the industry. They want to see a shared ambition with verifiable data from the supply chain to support those sustainability claims. So what's our role as processor in building this world-leading sustainable food system? So at Kepak Group, our founder, Noel Keating, always recognised the critical importance of remaining directly connected with farmers and livestock suppliers. And I can say that that philosophy is still true today. It's from this foundation that we have developed several innovative producer programs with multilateral stakeholder approach to address the needs of the stakeholders in the supply chain and the changing market requirements. So the most recent iteration of this program is the 2020 beef program. Many of you will be familiar with it. It's a strategic collaboration between Kepak Group and Tirlawn, formerly Glanbia, launched in 2019. It's specifically designed to work closely with our producers, and it provides them with a blueprint that covers the husbandry of the animal from birth through to finish. And they have a technical support team throughout that journey. The club's vision has sustainability at its core because it provides a closed-loop, fully integrated, high-quality beef supply chain with unrivaled traceability, while also delivering and creating a more financial and environmental value for the producer, and it's delivering for the market as well. To date, we've over 1,500 farmers signed up in the programme. 30,000 cattle have come through the club, and between now and the next 18 months, we expect an extra 60,000 cattle to go through the system. And farmer membership continues to grow. It is through this type of collaboration with our producers that we are better able to support the progress on the economic and environmental dimensions of sustainability in our supply chain, while at the same time helping our customers to reach their climate goals. We can see that their business model in the future will include more integrated supply chains, and this will be a key component to linking the producer and the customer. With the conversation on sustainability expanding quickly beyond emission reductions to include topics like nature and biodiversity, closed-loop integrated supply chains will be integral to customer engagement. And in time, we hope that that will be influencing more consumer purchase decisions. And something that's been mentioned several times this morning, but I want to stress here, is a key innovation or a key part of this innovation, which will also be fundamental to linking the producer and the consumer, is access to quality technology and data. As processors, we know that the period between now and 2030, the access of data, the capture, the measuring, the monitor of data and techniques around that will be critical to the success of the factor. This will be the virtual thread, for want of a better expression, to connect the producer and the consumer. It'll provide transparency along the food chain and, most critically, allow us to capture with evidence our producers' positive environmental, social and economic impact. At Kepak Group, along with our peers in the industry, we know that primary producers are a critical component to Ireland's vision for the future. Their economic viability is also crucial, not only for their livelihoods, but also for helping to deliver on those environmental and economic and social sustainabilities of the sector. We also want to acknowledge a lot has been asked of them, and more will be asked by all of us. We're in an enviable position in Ireland to have this unique ecosystem, which you can see up on the screen, of interconnected stakeholders who continuously work together supporting the industry to produce safe, sustainable food. But I want to put emphasis on the word ecosystem and trust. While the term ecosystem is not a new idea, the realisation of true interconnectedness of Ireland's agri-food ecosystem is where we can achieve our true potential. This requires an outside-in approach. And just a word on trust, because the underlying ingredient to all successful ecosystems is trust. We need all partners in the ecosystem to be able to trust each other. Trust is about doing what you say you're going to do. From Ireland's perspective, that means becoming a world leader in sustainable food systems by 2030. And remember this, trust trumps reputation every time. So to conclude, I want you to bring you back to 5.5 years ago. And 5.5 years from now, we will be 18 months away from 2030. And you can be sure, just like parenting my daughter Julia, there will be long days for all of us on this food vision journey. But you can also be sure that they will pass in a blink of an eye. Thank you.
All right, Margaret, thank you very much for that. I think we'll go straight into the presentation then from Jeroen, who is joining us from Lausanne online. So can we get... Let's see, he was well sitting there beside me. Yeah. Are you hearing us, Jeroen?
I'm hearing you. Are you hearing me?
Perfectly, perfectly. Feel free to...
Okay, good.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks very much, Bill. Good. Well, it's afternoon there as well already. Good afternoon, everyone. So I thought that staying in Lausanne would allow me to make the biggest carbon reduction contribution to the meeting. So hence my being in person at your meeting. Very sorry for that. I have 15 minutes, and in those 15 minutes, I'd like to give you a little bit of a view of some of the things that we care about in Nestle Research. I missed the intro, but as you know, I'm the head of the Nestle Institute of Agricultural Sciences, and I will talk about 4 specific topics. First one is regenerative agriculture. I'm sure you're all aware that Nestle has made significant commitments to its sourcing from regenerative agriculture. I'll then talk a little bit about the types of issues that brings up with being able to verify that through scientific measurement. I'll say a few words about what we think the drivers and pathways forward are for the achievement of regenerative agriculture. And then I've heard the previous speaker also referring to that already. A few words about premiumization or license to operate. So let's start then with regen agriculture. And it's one of those fantastic words that intrinsically everybody thinks it's wonderful. But if I ask 10 of you in the room to give me what it actually means, I'll probably get 15 different answers. And that of course is also a real issue when it comes to talking about this to consumers. And we have been talking and thinking quite a lot about on different platforms on whether there's a need for industry standards here. Do we need a common understanding backed up by scientific measurement of what regenerative agriculture actually means, and how do we go about it? discussions are going on about that. Then in Nestle, of course, we not only have made a regenerative agriculture pledge, but we've also made a net zero pledge, similar percentages at similar time intervals. But if you look at some of the things that are required for to achieve our regenerative agriculture KPI, they're not necessarily always in line with our net zero KPIs. And so part of the research we're doing as well is to make sure that, as we move forward with innovation in agricultural practices that contribute to regenerative agriculture, that we work with that tension between that maybe there between net zero. And a specific example there, of course, is regenerative agriculture has got specific KPIs on maintaining and enhancing biodiversity. Some cases that obviously can lead to increased land use for the same amount of production. And there may be tensions there in actually the emission requirements that we have in producing that crop. Now, that also comes back to some of the more scientific topics related to regenerative agriculture. How do you actually measure it? What are the objectively verifiable indicators? And there, of course, back again to, do we need a standard? What and how do we measure? How do we make sure that, we can actually measure these particular indicators at scale and they can be verified? What are the levels of evidence required? Do we need certification? And just to give you an answer, the way that we are looking at it, at the moment, much of these indicators where Nestle particularly looks at soil health, biodiversity, carbon, soil carbon, that requires us to take samples in quite a number of fields. Now, given the scale at which Nestle sources, both its dairy but also other commodities, we can't obviously take samples everywhere. So we're quite heavily involved in trying to look at new scientific methods that combines sensors with quite often new types of use of satellite imagery and data to make sure that we can actually not only scientifically measure, but also do that at scale and at a cost that will not make our supply chain more expensive than it is at the moment. Now, the other aspect when it comes to regenerative agriculture and how we're looking at that, I think it's probably been mentioned in some of the things you've spoken about before already. How do you actually translate regenerative agriculture in recognizable science-based outcome? To add to the consumer's understanding of this. And we've got quite a number of experiences where rather than talking about soil health or biodiversity per se, we're looking at different types of recognizable indicators, such as the presence of pollinators, species diversity, but also looking more as a whole at this whole biocomplexity and how that compares to nature. And so here we're developing numerous types of methodologies where we're actually able to compare the impact of our sourcing on biodiversity and biocomplexity per se, and are able to translate that into consumer recognizable outcomes. Thing though there is when you think about the pathways forward is the cost related to it. Now there are quite a number of no-brainers, of course. There's much we can do which doesn't necessarily have a cost, but there's also in many of our sourcing chains the transition to regenerative agriculture will take time and will have impact on revenue of farmers, in the short term on yields. And obviously, whilst Nestle has a number of programs in place that help farmers in making that transition and starting that transition. There are clearly more is needed to see how we can actually translate that transition into consumer recognizable and consumer willingness to pay for it, which I think the previous presenter also referred to, which isn't necessarily always there. As you know, or maybe don't know, Nestle invests about 2 billion per year in its transfer to regenerative agriculture, and that goes in numerous different types of programs. Whilst the commitment is there, clearly we're also looking at recuperating and getting consumers to really start recognizing the additional value of these products that are produced on the different types of production systems, and making sure that we get the producers get the premium that is required for that. But then in the end, this transition will take time, and what we're also increasingly recognizing is that the discussion at the moment isn't so much about premiumization, but it's more about license to operate. So the question is not so much whether at the moment whether there will be a reward, but what is increasingly likely and what is increasingly clear is that consumers expect certain types of production to take place. The absence, consumers expect the absence of agrochemicals in products. And so at the moment, it is likely that this type of transition will have to continue. We're looking at new types of ways which combines both the transition and additional revenue for producers. And this is very much the way we're currently looking at this as a whole. And I wanted to keep my intervention to that and maybe move to questions, as I see we're already at the allocated time. So thank you very much.
All right, Jen, I'd ask people to reflect on their questions, and I'll go to the audience in a minute. But just to start off things, Margaret, like one of the things, the processor is uniquely placed between the consumer and the producer. And you mentioned trust a lot. And if we look at the beef industry, it's not exemplar in terms of the level of trust that's in the overall system between those two. Talk to me about your reflections on how we might address that and how you would build that trust between all the parties that are in the supply chain.
Yeah, well, I think, Bill, we've talked today about the change that we're all making and how complex that is. And I think there's definitely legacy scenarios that are going to be there for a while until we all get used to this new way of working. But I mentioned when I was speaking earlier about trust trumping reputation. And I think that's an important point, because when we talk about reputation, we're talking about perceptions, and perceptions are often outside of our control. But when we talk about trust, we're talking about behaviour. And if we do what we say we're going to do, then we have an opportunity to build trust. So whether you're a processor, whether you're a retailer, whether you're an FMCG or a farmer, we have to do what we say we're going to do to build that trust, and that requires all of us to be involved in that.
But if you, like there's an old saying in Ireland, if you get a reputation for getting up early, you can stay in bed till lunchtime. Is there a credibility, let's say, issue in terms of saying, okay, we aspire for trust, but the actual building blocks to get there are really difficult and intangible in terms of saying, people's perception versus the reality of it?
Yeah, there is. And I think when you talk about, commodity trading, or in that context and that business model context, that's a different type of thing. But because we're moving into that area of integrated supply chains, that's not going to work without engagement. And if we have that engagement, you have an opportunity then to set objectives and to try and meet those objectives. And that's where we have to go. So we're not there yet, Bill, I referenced it there. I think we can all do more to engage better, but I think the sustainability agenda is going to support that and move it forward.
Okay, Jeroen, then, like, going back to your side, in terms of, like, you're a really multinational company with, I suppose, a lot of irons in the fire in terms of consumer expectation and demand, etc. This whole conundrum of saying, well, look at the producers, you need to produce more, you're saying it's a license to produce. That's in many ways a suggestion, well, just you have to do it as a minimum standard for entry to that, versus an expectation from many farmers as well that when we're doing this additionality, there should be additional support for that. There should be, I suppose, support from processors, from consumers, etc. How does that play out in terms of those international markets that you're working in terms of that expectation? On the one hand for support, on the other side for minimum standard.
Yeah, well, it plays out very differently in different markets, of course, in that, in different markets, consumers are prepared to pay for different things. In a number of markets and products in Brazil, for example, there's a great willingness to pay within certain consumer segments or dairy or other products that has been produced in a regenerative agriculture manner. But there's many other commodities and countries where that willingness to pay is not so prevalent. We have countries in which consumers are prepared to pay in premium for products that have been produced under specific and animal welfare standards, for example, that are higher than what is required by regulation. So it plays out very, very differently in different countries. What the company has made a commitment to, of course, is an overall commitment of, in terms of its percentage of carbon footprint reduction, but also its percentage of regenerative agriculture sourcing. And so what we're doing at the moment, we're having, particularly for some of our larger commodities, so that's in coffee and cocoa, we have specific programs in place, like the Nescafe plan and the Nestle cocoa plan, where we're actively supporting farmers to make the transition to regenerative agriculture practices. And so we're paying premiums for that, we're providing support for that. And in certain countries, for example, markets pay premium for dairy that has been produced with the use of new feed supplements that reduce the carbon footprint of that milk, Bofar being a point in case. Now that said, of course, we're also, and I think all large companies are doing that, looking at, what is it that entices consumers to pay more for a certain product? Is it just the fact that a company says it's been produced under regenerative agriculture? Does it require certification? Is it carbon footprint with additional properties? Is it regenerative agriculture with additional functional properties in your milk or your product? And so really it's a fine-tuning of products in different markets, and that will continue to evolve as we go through that. But as I said, the company has made a clear commitment. We are investing in that transition and continuing to do so.
Well, one of the things we heard this morning from Jack was the need for this pace to increase, to become quicker, that we're responding quicker to the challenges that are faced with us. How are we balancing, or how is Nestle balancing that need for quick movement and, I suppose, innovation in terms of its supply chain, and then trying to bring farmers along in terms of that transition, which for many of them is at a pace that maybe they're a little bit uncomfortable with?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously, and for us it's also very different. We have, of course, sourcing schemes where we have far closer contact with farmers than we have in. So part of our dairy, for example, our fresh dairy in particular, there's a program there called Farmer Connect, where we have very close contact with producers. And there, of course, the introduction or promotion of new types of production or technologies is much easier than in situations where we source in bulk. Again, what we do ourselves on the science side is that we have within Nestle 5 large research institute, the Institute of Agriculture Sciences being one from them. And we're actively contributing to new science, the testing and validating of new approaches that are out there. And we're doing that across the board. But at the same time, we're also, of course, partnering, and we're fairly agnostic in our partnering. We partner with corporates, we partner with academics, with NGOs on testing, identifying new approaches, also being able to roll that out quickly. So our connection from Nestle Research is very fluid with the part of Nestle that is operations and sourcing. And we have an active program of testing and validating everything that we recommend or provide guidance on is actively tested and validated on commercial reference farms before we do any type of rollout. And it is that type of organization and process and mechanism that we have. So getting the best of science in and being able to also quickly roll that out through our supply chains, that makes us better at actually getting the types of changes that are required. Now, that said, obviously in certain sourcing chains that will go faster than in others, but that has mostly to do with our direct connection with producers, which, like I said, in part of our fresh dairy sourcing is very direct. In our coffee and cocoa sourcing, it's also, but there's of course many other products where that connection between Nestle and producers is slightly looser and more difficult to influence.
Margaret, asking you that question then in terms of, bringing the suppliers with us in terms of what is consumer demand. Mm-hmm. What's Kepa's view in terms of how to do that and how we best achieve it, given there's a lot of pressure on the supplier in terms of, increasing pace at which these demands are coming, the level of change that's required, the level of innovation, etc. And I suppose a very crowded space in terms of what the consumer is certainly perceived as asking of. How are you linking those consumers and producers?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things in that, Bill. I would say that we have to bring the farmers on the journey with us. We've all referenced it this morning about how critical they are to this. If no meat, we won't have this conversation. So how are we bringing them? So typically we connect our customers with our farmer and we bring them to the farm. And that's where things come alive. You can only tell so much when you're looking at a screen or you're talking to somebody in a meeting room. But if we actually bring them on farm, that's where things come to life. And that's where they can both see what the farmer is doing, the commitment they have. But it's always more than the commitment. When you're talking about a farmer, it's a way of life, it's a purpose. And we need our customers to see that how hard they're working. Even if at this point in time, and Jeroen has referenced it as well, the consumer isn't yet paying for it, but in time we hope that that'll come with the evidence to support it. But right now we just need to go on this journey and we need to bring everyone with us.
And is there an element of manana with that in terms of the expectation? Does that influence the expectation of the buyers in terms of saying, well, look at, we anticipate the consumer is expecting this, we expect our suppliers to deliver it, but seeing it in the ground in terms of what we had heard earlier around where policy maybe could be driven by the ideology rather than the science element. Does it influence it when you see those interactions?
Does it influence, Bill? You mean, do they?
The purchasers, the buyers, etc.
So I think it gives them a confidence, Bill, that while we all work out how to manage sustainability and the complexity around it and the reporting that's coming, when they come on farm, it gives them a confidence that dealing with Ireland Inc., that there's an awful lot of that inherent sustainability in the ways that farmers have been farming for hundreds of years, So it gives them that confidence. And if you can imagine, if you are a large purchaser of a big category in a retailer or a large FMCG company, you're responsible for bringing a product to the market, and they need that confidence. They need to be able to walk away and say that I can trust that the product I'm bringing is safe and is nutritious and all of those things. And I think when they come on farm, that brings all of that to life. And that's a very important part of educating the customer and then in time the consumer as well.
Jeroen, going back to that technology and innovation piece, right, where you're particularly focused, the department has launched a public consultation in terms of new genomic techniques in the last number of days, and it's something being considered at European level in terms of how it. What's the consumer's view in terms of this? Because it traditionally would have been very suspicious, very concerned at this sort of development. Is there a changed appetite? Is there many ways how it could be framed in terms of at least informing a better discussion around how it could be done or how it could contribute to addressing those issues of sustainability, of supply of food for a growing world, etc.? Is there something we can be doing better in terms of how we look at that innovation, whether it's new genomic techniques or other areas of innovation that traditionally consumers are wary about?
Yeah, I think it's very good to make the difference between new genomic techniques and GMOs. I mean, Nestle has a very strict non-GMO policy. We don't source or do research or develop new technologies that are GMO based. On the other hand, of course, I think you all know there's a large amount of conversation and regulatory change going on with respect to CRISPR-Cas, which both in the EU and in the US, there's conversation ongoing that CRISPR-Cas will no longer be considered GMO. Now, what I think, or what we all think is required, is that when genetic modification came around, of course, there wasn't that social conversation, the conversation with society, which gave people the trust in the new technologies, and so science never really had the social license to roll that out, and I think that's been part of the reasons why it never really had or made the contribution that it could make. We still believe at Nestle, where particularly in some of our crops like coffee and cocoa, because there has been so little improvement breeding, we can make fast progress through the use of traditional breeding methods. But what we do use, for example, is marker identification, which allows us to speed up that conventional breeding by being able to identify varieties that have specific qualities that we're looking for, be it in terms of cup quality, be it in terms of being more drought resistant. And I think also in the dairy industry, for example, there's now, particularly when you're looking at being able to select dairy cattle that are naturally low emitters, without having any impact on their production. There's a number of genomic techniques that we can apply to identify those and really use these techniques to speed up the identification and the inclusion of those types of breeding objectives within our bull breeding system. So quite a bit of new stuff there to be considered. I think another thing to recognize is that whilst obviously tools like CRISPR-Cas they're touted as, but most of the aspects that we are interested in is not just one gene or one allele. So it's not that you apply CRISPR-Cas and the next day you have the solution. It's complex. It's governed by quite a number of different types of genetic markers, and so progress, even if we apply that, will be slow. I think in Nestle, and particularly in Nestle Research, we are, however, of the opinion that a carpenter should use all the tools that he has in his toolbox. So these types of tools should also be considered. But I think what is essential is that the use and introduction of those tools, and particularly the introduction of commodities that are sourced from those types of plants or products in the future, that there is that social discussion that is required to take away the fear aspect. But that also obviously requires science to be done and the scientific evidence to be there, so that we can indeed, prove that it does no harm. It does no harm in its consumption. It does no harm to biodiversity. It does no harm to soil health. And again, there, I think in certain cases we're still very far from having that level of evidence that will instill the confidence in most consumers that these products are indeed safe, and that these products can indeed make a significant contribution to solving part of the societal challenges that we're dealing with here.
Okay, I think it's timely then that I go to the audience in terms of any questions. It's very hard, as Damien identified, for me to see, but if anybody put up their hand and have a question. We're down in the middle there. Dale.
Thomas Strong. I suppose the question here is, when you talk about regenerative agriculture and encouraging that, how much of that focus is on producing a better quality product with higher nutritional value, as opposed to the sustainability and environmental impact that may come from producing that food? And is the consumer more likely to pay for the higher quality element as opposed to the sustainable element?
I'll start with Jeroen on that, I think, in the first instance.
Yeah, okay. Yes, that's a very interesting question, and I'm sure you all read the hype every day about how soil health equates to plant health, equates to human health. If you actually look at the scientific evidence that different type of agricultural practices or regenerative agriculture has an impact on the quality or nutrient density, there is hardly any. So we are actually having numerous trials in place that are looking at that connection. So it is definitely something that is on our radar. What has been found so far, that even in some of the trials that indicate that there may be some connection, the actual increases that you see are so small that are unlikely to have any impact on nutritional outcomes. So that the message is still so very much diversity, you won't solve it through that. But I think a bigger question is when it comes to plant breeding per se and regenerative agriculture, and whether at the moment, I think what is happening is that we're expecting that crops that have been developed to perform very well over the past 50 years under high input systems, that we expect them to do equally well under very different types of input and agronomic practices under regenerative agriculture. So I think there's a lot of work that can still be done on matching the right varieties with the right agronomic practices to get your best outcomes in terms of yield. And there we also know that different types of varieties are actually better in concentrating different types of nutrients. There's varieties that are much better at concentrating zinc or different types of vitamins. And so I think there is a lot of gain to be had. Whether consumers are willing to pay for that, yes, there probably are some. What we're finding very much at the moment, of course, is that as soon as economics, inflation hit, price becomes the overarching decider in what people buy. to a large scale. And so again, it's I think at the moment we're more looking at, there's obviously consumer expectations on what is in and what shouldn't be in what they're buying. Yeah, we haven't really got any evidence or seen that apart from a few markets and specific products where consumers are actually actively willing to pay for products that have the label regenerate. And I think that may also have something to do with the multitude of labels, the absence of clear scientific evidence, and a decision on what the level of evidence would be required to call something regenerative agriculture. And also then again, of course, going back to your question, being able to actually establish the linkage that regen ag leads to better outcomes in both crops or in animals, and therefore has a significant impact on human health as well. In the absence of that, we are putting research in place, and not only we, but many of our partners and many other organizations around the world to disentangle this and get far clearer indication of what its real impact is.
If I have another question, I'll take it. If I don't, I'm going to go back to Margaret. In the previous session, we had a lot of discussion around the need for cooperation, okay? That level of sharing of knowledge, of information, etc. I suppose working in government, many times you kind of reflect that all roads lead to Rome, was an old saying. How do we create, however, that engagement across industry, which is competition in many ways, but cooperation that is fundamental towards the objective of improving our sustainability credentials, bringing our farmers with us? Are we creating those environments where there's discussions between companies with the objective of overall moving the dial, improving our overall offering as in Ireland? Or are we too, I suppose, divided in terms of processors on that engagement? Or have you experienced in terms of how that could be improved?
I think, Bill, that'll take some time until inside companies themselves they understand what sustainability means to them. And there's still a shift inside businesses, I think, trying to move from, the financial objectives and measuring then the non-financial, which is sustainability. So there's an awful lot of learning to happen. I think the Food Vision 2030 group is an example of one of those groups that can work well in terms of implementing this. I also think transparency. There's a couple of good examples of retailers in Europe recently who are trialling the true cost economics around what it really costs to put a product on the market. Reva in Germany are doing it, and Ahold Delhaize are doing it as well. So it'll be interesting to see how consumers respond to that and where they're calculating the true cost of putting a product onto the shelves when you take all the environmental, economic and social impacts into account. So that will tell a lot in terms of how consumers respond when they have the truth and when they understand exactly what's involved.
Jeroen, on that train of thought, like in terms of for example, we're a funder of research, and one of the things we have prioritised over recent years is an international element. So that's Ireland research engaging with Europe through Horizon. It's Irish research engaging with New Zealand so that you can double the pace. You have 2 summers effectively in a 12-month period. And it's Ireland, US, Northern Ireland type research funding. What on a company level are you seeing in terms of the opportunity for collaboration, whether it's in terms of research or data sharing as a commercial company? What are the pros and cons? Are there fears? Are there concerns? How could they be allayed so we're maximising that cooperation with the ultimate objective of creating sustainable agriculture food systems? Are we missing any elements?
Well, I hope we're not. And in Nestle, we definitely, like I mentioned before, we're fairly agnostic about. And I can give you an example of the way we're doing this in dairy, for example. Here we are sort of closely collaborating with the Global Research Alliance, for example, and talking about setting up a network of dairy research farms that would allow us to, much as was done in COVID, to test the same technologies in parallel in multiple locations, in multiple production systems, so that you get a lot of data at the same time, which would allow you to make progress much faster and roll out new and exciting technologies or new and exciting processes or production methodologies. And so we're actively involved in that. And that is really the approach we take across all of our research. We work in a number of consortia, for example, as well. Nestle is an active funder, for example, of the Greener Cattle initiative, which funds international collaboration on new and disruptive technologies related to the reduction of enteric methane production. We are in a number of other consortia related to coffee and cocoa. So collaboration, sharing of data, particularly related to these societal challenges, is part of our research DNA, and very happy to also look at additional opportunities to collaborate in Ireland, and we're doing that indirectly through the GRA. But there may be very many other opportunities as well.
Well, I suppose just on that point, it's great that we have the ASA president. Tommy Boland is chair of the global research, joint chair of global research and livestock. Just look at, I don't want to keep people from their food, so just a couple of final comments then from both of our contributors. The whole theme of this section was connecting consumer and producer. What's your key message in terms of saying what do we need to do and what do we need to focus on the years ahead in terms of creating that connection?
I think it's critical that we get the evidence to demonstrate the work that we're doing so that we can bring that to market and support our customers to reach their sustainability targets. That's critical. We need the data sharing, and to do that we're going to need better collaboration between us, and that's going to be a change of mindset, but we're not going to get there without doing it together.
Okay. Jeroen, from your perspective?
Yeah, look, I can only echo that and give you another example, particularly related again to the dairy industry, where Nestle, with many other corporates, Friesland Campina, Danone, and Arla, and many others, where we are setting up, actively looking at protocols that designate the required level of evidence for a new technology before we can actually incorporate that in our carbon footprint accounting. And that, of course, comes back to having the appropriate scientific evidence that ensures that what we are saying to customers on production, on carbon footprint, can actually be verified. And we're doing that as an industry with our industry partners, but we're also doing that with science and getting it science endorsed. And I think that is part of the way we need to go. There have been too many incidents, I think, recently where greenwashing was either suspected or proven, and I think that has obviously made the general public suspicious on all these types of claims. So recreating that trust in science requires our investment in scientific pursuit and in the creation of evidence, and that is an active part of what we're working on, not only on dairy but also in all the other commodities that Nestle sources around the world. And we will continue to actively invest and contribute to that availability of data and evidence.
Okay, folks, I've run out of time. We could go on for a lot longer, but I've learned a long time ago, definitely do not keep people from their lunch. I'd like in a second to ask you to put your hands together for Margaret and your own in terms of a very interesting session. I want to apologize for my cough. it came just at the wrong time, and that's Sod's law. As I said, it's certainly not COVID. Just in terms of housekeeping, I have been asked at the end of the session to make sure that everybody's aware we're going for lunch out to the doors here into the main hotel, and to ask people that, look, there is a great opportunity in terms of connections, but please be back at 2 o'clock because we want to commence session 3 at 2 o'clock sharp. So out through the doors, turn right and into the main body of the hotel. Thank you very much for your attention. Okay.